Hi, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Numbers. This is the podcast that explores the people and the insights behind real business success. I'm Dave Bookbinder, and I'm known as a business valuation expert and best-selling author. And as I always say, the numbers tell the story, but they don't tell the whole story. So let's go behind the numbers. If you look at almost any struggling company, the biggest line item driving them into the dirt isn't really necessarily their supply chain, their software, or their rent. It's their people. Specifically, it's a culture that quietly is burning cash through quiet quitting, toxic managers, and high turnover. My guest today argues that culture isn't a soft HR or feel good kind of perk. It's a hard metric directly tied to your profit margin. Oh, by the way, if you're a listener to this program, you know I say the same thing. He is the co-founder of BetterCulture, which is a world-class. He's also a world-class speaker, and he's a guy who literally protects the right of good employees to work with other good employees. Brett Hoogeveen, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Dave. Excited to be here.
It's my pleasure. Brett, tell the audience anything about yourself that I didn't cover in the open.
Hey, you covered a lot. One little thing that might be of interest to your specific audience is I've done a lot of business investing, startup investing, angel investing. So I'm a culture guy, but I really am passionate about the financial performance of businesses and making smart investments. And over my career, both in my professional working world as well as in looking at organizations, I just see a massive amount of value that comes from people and culture that often gets overlooked.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm a finance guy who's kind of preaching the same message that your people are your most valuable assets. And people often say to me, isn't it kind of odd a finance guy is talking about these otherwise known as HR type things? Do you get that too?
I mean, they're not. You can call them HR type things if you want, I suppose, but to pigeonhole them to the way that all of your employees feel about their job, their coworkers, their company, their mission, they feel every moment of the day. To pigeonhole that as an HR issue, I think, is a gross miscalculation.
And I completely agree with you. I admittedly threw that right down the plate for you. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So Brett, many executives, unfortunately, still may view company culture as a soft HR driven thing. And they focus on the office perks, the pizza on Fridays or beer o'clock or whatever. How do you pivot that conversation to show them that culture really is a hard metric that is linked directly to productivity and profit?
So, Dave, that's a very complicated question and one that we could go about 100 directions on.
We've
So
got
feel free
time.
to direct me if you
We've
want to
got plenty
go.
of time here. Go
Yeah.
for it.
So first off, I like to just start with the point that the things you mentioned, pizza parties, perks, are things that financially minded people tend to think of as expenses. And when I'm working with leaders and organizations, one of the first conversations I like to try to have is a conversation that centers around this misperception that culture stuff should cost you money instead of make you money. And there are so many. It's easy to think about, well, payroll is a cost, or a benefit or a perk is a cost, and I understand that. But ultimately, what culture is it's the attitudes and behaviors that people show up with. And if your employees show up with better attitudes and behaviors, your customers get a better experience. They stick around longer. Turnover drops, performance improves, quality improves, and all of these things are actually drivers of value for your business. They are what really should be considered, if you have a healthy culture, assets of the business that drive financial performance. And so often one of the biggest misconceptions that I see is people think about culture as an expense, not an asset. And I really think that's upside down.
Yeah, and furthermore, they often think of people as an expense, not an asset, because again, payroll and benefits tends to land in the expense buckets, and people don't appear on a balance sheet as an asset next to all the other things that you traditionally look for. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so McKinsey has put out studies that show if you go really large organizations, Fortune 500 type companies, $200 to $300 million per year they're losing in lost productivity if they don't have healthy cultures, right? And every small business owner can recognize this as well. I have 8 employees at BetterCulture, And I can tell you, if we make one amazing hire who's a great culture fit, who loves what we do, who's connected to our purpose, who just loves doing what we do, it makes a world of difference to our business and to my quality of life as a leader. If we make one mishire, it is the exact opposite. And I know leaders have lived through this. I just don't know why it doesn't sink through that these people issues that cause business challenges are that's what culture is. And if we can improve culture, we improve our quality of life and the performance of our business.
Yeah, exclamation mark. Exactly. Look, I'm sitting on the same side of the table as you. And it's interesting in the work that I've done in the new ROI to try to understand the return on individuals. I learned an interesting fun fact. As a leader, we tend to want to, as in recruiting, try to find the rock star employees. We're all looking for that great type A rock star. And the Harvard data actually proved that you're better off, rather than looking for that rock star, avoid the toxic, because that toxic employee will destroy your culture like a cancer, and it will have a rippling effect throughout the entire organization.
Yeah, 100% agree. One of our leadership principles that we teach at BetterCulture is to protect the right of good employees to work with other good employees. That is an obligation of leadership. And if you don't take that seriously, if you don't protect the right of your good people to work with other good people, right, avoiding those toxic coworkers like you're talking about, I can promise you who's going to be happy and who's going to be there in 18 months. And it's not your good employees. It's folks that are willing to put up with that sort of toxic culture and environment. And that's not the type of team that you want to be leading.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, so, Brett, Better Culture talks about a framework that engages the employees from the top down and bottom up. Where do you see most leaders fail when they're trying to build a culture from the bottom up?
Hmm. Culture really is the attitudes and behaviors that everybody brings to the table. Leaders set the stage for that. Leaders set expectations. Leaders have an outsized impact, obviously, on culture. But ultimately, what the leader needs to do is influence the culture that other people bring to life. And so when I think about top-down leadership development, that's what leaders do. Leaders build culture by leading. But that's maybe 15% of an average workforce is management, leadership. The other 85% is the employees that work in your organization. And it's the attitudes and behaviors that they bring every day that really comprise the majority of what your culture is. And so thinking bottom up culture building is forget leadership for a moment. What could everybody do to change the dynamic of your workforce, to create a healthier team environment, to create a team where they enjoy being part of more and more? We build a whole product around that addresses what up to 20 ideal attitudes and behaviors that every employer we worked with had said, oh my goodness, I would love if my employees showed up with these attitudes and behaviors. And so ultimately, if you want to shape a healthier culture, it's just two steps. You have to identify what the right attitudes and behaviors are, and then you have to do something proactive to shape those attitudes and behaviors from your employees to get them to show up with more of those attitudes and behaviors next month than they did this month. And that's what building a better culture looks like. So many organizations get stuck on talking about culture things, but they're not documenting progress. They're not showing, hey, my employees are happier this quarter than they were last quarter. And if you're not doing those things, you might have a good culture, but you're not building a better culture. And the organizations and leaders I like working with are the ones that say, yeah, we're okay today. We're pretty good today. How can we be better tomorrow? And I think by thinking about how could you have better leaders and better followers, both top down and bottom up, is how organizations make that steady and consistent progress.
Yeah, and you referred to behaviors. I want to talk about some of the behaviors that maybe people need to avoid. And I think in a recent podcast interview that you had done, you talked about three invisible behaviors that kill new ideas and innovation faster than budget cuts. What are those subtle habits that leaders are tolerating that quietly is destroying your culture?
Oh boy, there are a lot. We One of the ones that I see most often, and this to some folks, the light bulb will immediately go on and they'll say, oh my gosh, yes. And to other folks, this may not sound like a big deal, Dave. But when I look in organizations that struggle, that have team members who struggle to assume positive intent of their colleagues, or of their leaders or of their organization, that's one very clear behavior that is a super clear signal of how healthy a team or culture is when people read a memo, when people get put on an email, when there's a discussion group or there's a meeting after a meeting, are people assuming positive intent from their coworkers? Because that's such an indicator of trust, of healthy team dynamics. That's one of the things that I lean into most when I'm working with organizations. I try to get a feel for, do people give one another the benefit of the doubt? They say, yeah, I'm sure she didn't mean it that way. Or, yeah, I'm sure there's a reason that we have to change this policy. I'm sure there's a good reason. I'm sure someone has given this thought, right? People are much more quick to get on board. They're much more willing to give people a bit of grace, to assume positive intent. When you ingrain sort of simple concepts like that of when in doubt, try to assume positive intent. And that works great in the workplace. It works just as well outside of the workplace in helping people lead lower stress, higher happiness lives, right? So when I'm driving down the road, I assume positive intent from other drivers, even if they cut me off. That's fine. It must be in a hurry. Like, I go on enjoying my day. They get where they're going. I get where I'm going. And I think you build a better, healthier culture along the way.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you're talking about so many of the things that I've talked about on this show many times over, and just to emphasize that the assumption of positive intent. I've said many times that everybody is showing up at work and in life in general, dealing with stuff that you know nothing about, whether it's a child issue, a parent issue, relationship issue, financial issue, so many things that human beings are dealing with. And sometimes they may look distracted. Sometimes they may come to work a few minutes late, and you can't make assumptions that they're disengaging or checking out. You're better off checking in, as you said, assume positive intent and go from there. So I just wanted to emphasize that once again here for the audience. Brett, one of your signature keynote topics is something that's called stars versus vacuums, the battle for your heart of your workplace culture. I want you to walk us through that analogy. And how do leaders spot vacuums before they drain the energy of a team?
Will can I involve you in this example, Dave? Will you play along with me?
Sure, just don't embarrass me. I've got enough of that to deal with already.
All right. Describe for me, give me 2 or 3 things that a star employee would do. Just off the top of your head. Describe a star employee. What comes to mind? Just 2 or 3 characteristics or attitudes, behaviors, whatever it might look like.
Yeah, so when I'm looking to hire, I don't focus as much on the skills and experience. I'm looking for the culture fit. So I'm looking for things like intellectual curiosity, fit with the team. Somebody who's asking good questions and somebody who's going to be relatable and get along. Somebody that you're going to be okay having lunch with, or if you're stuck working late with them, it's going to be okay.
Love it. That's perfect. Good. Those are good definitions of something that you would consider elements of a star. Now, give me 1 or 2 things that you'd say this person would be a vacuum. They would just suck the life or the energy out of my team or the organization. They'd be toxic. Give me 1 or 2 characteristics of a toxic person.
All right. So the bad news is I learned this one from experience in hindsight. At a particular point in time, we had this luxury of being so busy that we desperately needed to bring people on board. And because we needed people quickly, maybe we overlooked some of the things that were staring us in the face. And only with hindsight did we come to recognize that. So things like not being able to make eye contact during an interview.
Yeah.
That completely awkward lunch that, despite every best effort to try and get it on track to relate to somebody as a human being, just never ever got there. So I'll leave it at those 2.
Sure, absolutely. You went pretty easy on the toxic characteristics. I can understand how those types of things can impair team function dynamics, relationships, etc. But like you would believe the horror stories that I've heard and worked through of toxic behaviors from employees. And since I guess this is a great analogy for your particular show, when we talk about going behind the numbers, I invite people to imagine that your workplace, however many employees it is, let's imagine there's a company with 100 employees. And those employees, you can plot their culture fit, I'm going to say quality of employee, on a distribution chart. Okay. Now I know most people can't see the visual here as they're listening, most likely, but imagine a bell curve where you've got high performers on one end, your stars, you've got vacuums on the low end, your vacuums, and then there's a bunch of people in the middle. Now, we don't have a cute term for the people in the middle. I just call them the people in the middle. But if you want to have a healthier team and a healthier culture, all you're trying to do is shift that curve. You're trying to shift the curve toward the stars and away from the vacuums. And an average company might have the same number of stars. Maybe you have 100 employees, you got 5 superstars, you got 5 terrible vacuums, you got 90 people sort of in the middle. Now, there are only 3 ways that you can shift that distribution. There's only 3 ways. Number 1 is you could hire more stars. You could hire 5 more people next month, and they could be flat out superstars, and you could be amazing at your interview process. And all of a sudden, you have 105 employees, but 10 of them are stars, and it shifts the distribution a little bit, right? Another way you can shift that distribution to build a healthier team, healthier culture is let go of some vacuums. If you have some vacuums that you let them go bless some other organization with their company, that shifts your distribution as well. Or the big one that people just don't spend enough time on is you can shape the behaviors that those 100 employees that you have today show up with. You can help them grow and develop and become more successful as contributors and teammates. And so if everybody gets a little bit better, that shifts the distribution as well. And so with any organization I'm working with, I'm always trying to figure out how can we add more value to your business by improving the health of your culture and upskilling leaders. And that simple bell curve is always in my mind. Are we adding stars or moving vacuums or shifting, upskilling everybody in the middle? Because we're trying to drive consistent and steady improvement. So that's kind of what the stars versus vacuums analogy helps me paint a picture of. You always want to protect your stars and make your vacuums just a little bit uncomfortable, whereas they either need to shape up or kind of ship out.
Yeah, I like that. And I appreciate you sharing that because I think that's really relatable. And I think everybody gets that and they're nodding as you're speaking here. So I want to talk a little bit about something I also learned in my first book from the Harvard researchers that collaborated with me. And that is that the toxic employees, ironically enough, generally are high performers. And the analogy I always draw is like to the NFL. When you look at the diva wide receivers, for example, really bad in the locker room, but they're superstars. So despite their poor behavior, and being bad teammates, people always seem to want to bring them into free agency and sign them thinking that they're going to rehabilitate them. So with that as the segue here, principle number 4 of your 7 principles of leadership talks about the leaders protecting the rights of good staff to work with good staff. And that sounds absolutely amazing and intentional.
Yep.
What does protecting that right really look like when a leader has to make the tough decisions about that high performing toxic employee?
Well, I'm going to go 2 directions on this for you. The first one, I will say, a toxic high performer, a mistake that I hear over and over and over again from leaders who have been burned by this, who've lived through it and have come out the other side, is to underestimate the damage that a person like that is having on the rest of the team. Okay. So, boy, she's my best salesperson. She's our best XYZ. She's the most productive. I know she's causing cultural challenges, but I don't know if we could afford to lose her. I don't know if we can really address this or if we could choose to terminate this person or act on these things because I'm so worried about what would happen to the performance of the rest of the team. My experience and my client's experience has been overwhelmingly that when leadership does finally act on dealing with a toxic high performer and they leave the organization, the rest of the team more than makes up for the loss in performance. Those people that were around them that were disengaged, unhappy, saying, oh, I'm not going to do XYZ, they lean in, they do more, they help the team perform at a higher level. And so, the 5 people around that person improve enough to actually make up for the fact that, yeah, they were pretty high performing, but we're doing better after they leave. Has that been your experience, Dave? Have you seen that yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know a lot of people have asked this question before about it. Can you rehabilitate the toxic? Are you better off just kind of putting them in a corner and let them not interact as much with other people? Certainly don't let them interact with your customers. So it's a regular topic of debate.
So I want to make my second, since I said I was going to go 2 directions, and then I'm going to come back to that. The other thing is I would respectfully challenge the thesis a little bit that sometimes toxic employees are high performers, but I personally would not, I'd have to see the data that you're referring to, but I would not agree that most toxic employees are high performers. There are some cases where high performers are toxic, But I see a lot of cases where there are toxic colleagues that are also not high performers. So I don't think they're correlated in my own mind, the high performance and toxicity, although there's certainly use cases. That would be my personal experience. So I just wanted to mention that.
No, that's fair.
Um,
I was kind of surprised when I saw that too.
yeah. What would be your, I'm sorry, give me that follow-up question one more time.
I got to be honest with you, it's gone. I want to
Okay,
continue.
good. That's
I
fine.
want to continue on, and because there's so many things I want to talk to you about.
Good. Let's do
Uh,
it.
because one of the things that we talk about and on this program is this statistic that I've shared before, that in the US, the average age when somebody gets promoted is age 31. And the average age when they get their first leadership training is about a decade later. So basically, for a decade, they're screwing it up, trying to maybe emulate the good bosses they worked for, or not behave like the bad bosses that they never wanted to become. And you talk about the folks who become, we'll call them accidental managers. And I see this every day too in my world. They're great technicians, but they're not really leadership material, shall we say? So I wanted to let you talk about that and maybe offer a mindset shift that the accidental manager needs to think about in their first 30 days or 60 days in that role.
Well, first off, I don't know how I could be doing this job for 15 years without knowing that statistic. I love that. So I'm going to remember that, the average manager gets their first job at 41 and or 31 in their first leadership training at 41. Um, that's the work we do at BetterCulture. That's the primary work that we've done for the last 15 years, is tried to upskill leaders in skill set. But before you can teach skills, you really have to adjust their mindset. The first consulting company that I started was called Mindset, and we really focused on building the mindset of leaders. And that mindset that we try to teach is built around 7 simple principles that are incredibly powerful and empowering to leaders. And I won't take a lot of time on this, but I would love just to paint the picture of, if you have a clear mindset for what does it mean to be a leader, how much that can change not just how you show up as a leader, but even what you see as the opportunities as a leader. And so maybe I'll just mention a few of the principles. I won't try to do all 7, but I've mentioned principle 4, right? That it's a leader's job to protect the right of good employees to work with good employees. And if you really think that's your responsibility, you can't let toxicity just sit there. It's your job to protect the right of good employees to work with other good employees. And we say things like, usually don't duck the conflict, go have the conversation, give the coaching for the 7th time. And ultimately, if it doesn't make progress, you need to treat that as a performance issue and deal with it as a performance issue, right? So that's principle 4. But principle, 2 would say it's a leader's job to help their employees feel proud of their company and to know that their company is proud of them. Now, if you as a leader recognize your job isn't just to manage a function or to fill out a time card or get people to do XYZ production, your job is to make sure that every day they feel more proud of where they work and what they do, and that they feel seen and valued and recognized for that work. That changes not just what a leader ultimately does, but just what they see. You'll see all kinds of opportunities to build a sense of pride once you realize that's your job as a leader. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. 100%.
Yeah. So maybe I'll give you one more, which is the 3rd principle we teach,
Sure.
which is it's a leader's job to help people be successful both at work and in life. Now, when employees work for an organization and employees can feel if their manager or if their company cares about them at all, right? Hey, show up, do your job, check these boxes, XYZ. But a big component of healthy cultures and high engagement, Dave, is it's how employees feel about where they work. And when a leader shifts their mindset to saying, it's not only my job to help you be successful at work, but even outside of work in life, it puts different types of conversations on the table, and it builds a different kind of relationship between that employee and their organization. And guess what? If an employer is there for their employees when the employees need it, the employees will show up for the employer when the employer needs it, right? Any investment that I can make into the success or the happiness of one of my team members or employees comes back to the organization 5 times over in loyalty, in work ethic, in pride, in all these things that they can seem invisible, but they add a massive amount of value to any organization.
Yeah, and I've talked about them enough on this program that I'm not going to jump into them now, but I'm a poster boy for all of what you just said. Brett, when we talk about building a culture inside a smaller organization, it's an easier task if you only have a handful of employees and everybody's having lunch together, for example. So, how do we build that culture when we're starting to scale a business?
Whew. So I'm a huge advocate. In the last couple of years, this has been the number one thing I've implored business owners to think about. And I would just ask this question: if you're a leader in an organization, do you have a if hopefully you buy what Dave and I are talking about, and if you do, if you believe there's value in culture, then here's my question: do you have a strategic plan for building a better company culture, for driving continuous improvement in your employee experience and in your culture? And what most organizations don't have, Dave, regardless of their level of scale, right? As you start to think about scaling, or as you've scaled, to hundreds or thousands of employees, is almost all of those organizations will have a strategic plan for the business, that where they're thinking about the business. But when I say, what's your strategic plan for continuously improving your culture? They're like, oh, we don't have that. And so that would be point number one, is treat culture as a strategic priority and have a plan for driving continuous improvement. And we have a framework for that, and about how to help people think about treating culture like a strategic continuous improvement priority.
As it rightfully is. So, getting down to the short strokes here, Brett, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention this one little element here. You've got a keynote called Stupid Things Leaders Do. So, I want you to lean into that and tell us what's the single or several, frankly, stupidest things you've seen well meaning leaders do.
Woo, long list here. We've covered a couple of them already. Things like not understanding the value of pride, not realizing that it's their job to protect the right of good employees to work with good employees. So some of those leadership principles flip over there, Dave. I'll tell you, it is such a fun topic. One of the biggest pieces of advice that I lean into with all of our organizations is, if you want to get better at anything, you can try to become world class by being brilliant and coming up with all the innovative new ideas. But often the fastest way to make progress is to stop doing stupid things, stop shooting yourself in the foot every day. So if you want to be a better leader, a more effective leader, ask yourself the question: what would a terrible leader do in this situation? What would nightmare leadership look like? And make a list of 15, 20 things, come up with some scenarios, and ultimately pause afterwards and reflect: do I do any of those things? Right? Do I not ever check in with some of my folks? Do I show up first thing in the morning and jump straight into business and not take a little bit of an interest in how somebody's weekend was, etc.? Now, of course, there's yelling and there's screaming and there's shaming and there's all kinds of really, unfortunate offenses out there of really bad things leaders do. But often what I see the biggest missteps from leaders is, it's not acts of commission, it's sort of acts of omission, where it's like, oh, you could have helped that person feel so appreciated right there and you missed the opportunity, right? Most bad leaders don't wake up in the morning saying, I'm going to try to be a really lousy leader today. It just sort of happens by accident.
Yeah, and that's so important to look in the mirror and ask yourself that tough question. So, thank you for sharing that. Brett, I want you to tell the audience where they can find you, how they can learn more about you, work with you, et cetera.
Yeah, well, check out betterculture.com. We have a lot of free resources there on our Insights tab. You can find me on all the social medias. I'm out there on LinkedIn and Instagram and things like that. I host the Better Culture podcast, people can check out. But the one thing, Dave, that I've never shared before when I've guested on a podcast that I'd really like to encourage people to try, we, for the first time, we do executive retreats where we help organizations build that continuous improvement strategy. And it costs a lot to hire us to do that with your exec team for a day or two. We built an AI agent that can help organizations think through this 5-pillar model for building a strategic plan for culture improvement. And I'd like to give that away just for free to your listeners if they're interested. And it's not going to tell you everything you should do, but it will help you build a mental model for what would continuous improvement look like. And if you'll dive in, the more info you'll give it, the better you'll get back as a like a 10-page report on the back end. And so if people would like to check that out, all they have to do is go to betterculture.com/behind the numbers. And there's a custom landing page just for your listeners. And like I said, this is a very cool resource. It probably takes 15 minutes of Q&A with the agent, but it gives you not just some good advice, but a framework for how to think about driving improvement across your whole organization.
That's awesome. And I will make sure that that is in the show notes for our listeners. Brett, thank you so much for joining us today on Behind the Numbers. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Dave, it's been a blast. Keep doing what you're doing.
You too, brother. Take care. And thank you out there for tuning into Behind the Numbers. I really do appreciate your support. If you're not subscribed, make sure you do crush that subscribe button so you don't miss another episode. Until next time, I'm Dave Bookbinder reminding you that the numbers tell the story, but the people bring it to life. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next time. Yeah, and that's so important to look in the mirror and ask yourself that tough question. So thank you for sharing that. Brett, I want you to tell the audience where they can find you, how they can learn more about you, work with you, etc. That's awesome. And I will make sure that that is in the show notes for our listeners. Brett, thank you so much for joining us today on Behind the Numbers. Really enjoyed this conversation. You too, brother. Take care. And thank you out there for tuning into Behind the Numbers. I really do appreciate your support. If you're not subscribed, make sure you do crush that subscribe button so you don't miss another episode. Until next time, I'm Dave Bookbinder reminding you that the numbers tell the story, but the people bring it to life. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.